Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest this week. It's going to be the turn of the singer Terry Blackwood, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry. One-time member of the kind of, I suppose, Christian pop act, the Imperials, but also sung with Elvis Presley during his Las Vegas period, the late 60s, early 70s. I know we like to vary our guests. So, yes, this is the interview. So after several minutes of casual chat, we got down to that very exciting subject that was the early formative years. Terry, tell us that. Tell us more. Tell us everything. Over to you.
Well, my father was an original member or a founding member of a group called the Blackwood Brothers Quartet. They were a three brothers who got together, and the oldest brother's son, and they started a quartet. In fact, my father used to introduce the group and say, "We are the only group you will ever see who has three brothers, two uncles, two nephews, a father, and a son." It's because the oldest brother was 20 years old when his youngest brother was born. So by the time James, the youngest brother, was born, the oldest brother, Roy, had a son named R.W. So the original quartet was Roy, my father, Doyle, James, the youngest brother, and Roy's son, R.W.
Yes.
So I was raised in a musical family of gospel music. It's all I've ever known. I was raised in church. I accepted Christ when I was 12 years old. I walked down the aisle and received Christ into my life. And little did I know that several years later, I would be opening on a stage in Las Vegas, Nevada with Elvis Presley.
Yes.
We never called Elvis. We never called him. Oh, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my history because I started piano at the age of 7. I studied classical music for 12 years, all the way through college.
Yes.
I had no aspirations of ever singing because I just thought that I'd be playing piano all of my life. But when my voice changed around 14, I started to sing in Sunday school in our church, and people began to take note that, hey, this little guy can sing. So I started singing in Sunday school and in church, and so I went on through college singing in the opera workshops and got my degree minor in music theory.
Yes.
And 3 months after I left college, I graduated, I got a call from the Stamps Quartet to sing with the group. No, I'm sorry. 1 year after I was in college, I got the call from the Stamps. And I sang with them for a year and a half, traveled around the country, all through Canada, and all over the western part of the U.S. And after a year and a half, I decided I wanted to go back and finish college, so I did. So 3 years later, I graduated from University of Memphis, and 3 months later, Joe Mascao of the Imperials called me and asked me if I would sing with the group. So my career has always been music. It's always been my life and my calling. I think God called me to sing and to play, and I've tried my best to be faithful to that calling.
Yes.
And the thing is, how many groups would have loved to sing with Elvis Presley? But the interesting thing is, Elvis called us. He said he called one morning when our offices were in Nashville, Tennessee, and Joe Mascao, our manager, happened to be in the office early that day, and the phone rang and it happened before we even got there. And Elvis called and said, "Joe, I've been listening to the Imperials sing. I listened to your first two records, New Dimensions and Imperials Now, and I love your group. I would love to have the Imperials join me in Las Vegas in July. And this was in May. So he said, I would love for you to come in July and open with me in Las Vegas. Well, he said, well, Elvis, let me ask the guys. He looked around the empty room. There were none of us there.
Yes.
And he said, guys, would you like to open in Las Vegas with Elvis? And there was just dead silence. He got back on the phone with Elvis and said, Elvis, they all nodded yes.
I mean,
so he said, we'd love to join you in July.
Yes. And when you, I mean, having sort of, went to school, went to college and sort of devoted your life to music, what sort of period, when did you leave school at sort of 16, or was it kind of 18 when you were at that stage? Because I'm not quite sure what the educational system of the USA is like compared to the UK.
I think I graduated at 17, and I went right into my first year of college at 18.
Right.
And I started in business administration.
Yes.
I didn't even start in music.
And what sort of year was this? Was this kind of, because I have absolutely no idea. So yes, was this 1950 something? Was this the kind of 50s that you saw?
Well, I'd be in the early 60s. I'm considerably older than you, but I feel great. In fact, this morning I just did 45 push-ups.
Oh, well then.
I'm trying to stay my body in shape.
I have to say that's I'm impressed, because frankly I can do 10 to 15 and then I have to go on my knees and keep doing them. But I'm getting there. I mean, yes. Well, that's good. Sort of good body, good mind, good spirit. That's the main thing, isn't it? Really, you have to keep it all going, because otherwise things start to get a bit sort of creaky. But did you, when you were growing up, because obviously Elvis was, such a sort of figure during this sort of, I suppose, the 50s. Did he sort of influence you much on the music front? Did you take much interest in people like Elvis or Little Richard or sort of Buddy Holly, Eddie Cochran, any of these kind of characters, or were you sort of?
Actually, I didn't. I was not an Elvis Presley fan. I was basically into gospel music and church music, and I know that in Memphis there was quite a following of when Elvis started his career. He became very famous in Memphis, and several of the other Memphis artists were quite popular. But I never really developed an appreciation for Elvis until I started singing with him. Mm-hmm. And that's when I really appreciated just what a great singer he was and a great entertainer. But, you also had several other black rhythm and blues singers in Memphis who were doing quite well too.
Yes. Well, I guess, I mean, for us, I remember sort of people like I suppose the Rolling Stones would often talk about all the kind of B.B. King and Robert Johnson.
Yeah, B.B. King was who I was thinking of.
Right, and
I didn't know it, but the Rolling Stones. Is it Keith Richards, the guitarist?
Yes.
He is a huge fan of James Burton, the lead guitar player for Elvis.
Of course, yes. I think I've recently seen when he's been touring. I think this was last year in America. He'd have in his changing room. I think he had a picture of James Burton, and would be playing sort of Elvis records, because these are the people that people like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and all grew up listening to and being very excited. So as the 60s progressed, were you kind of interested or at all influenced by that kind of the birth, I suppose, of the teenager, and that I suppose there was quite a cultural revolution that happened, from 63 throughout, because you had popular music kind of became such a thing, and the birth of a teenager was kind of such a thing during that period, with people like the sort of the Beatles and the Stones, and then obviously the American bands, and things just radically changed. Did that, was that something that you were aware of, or were you sort of on quite a different path at this stage?
Well, when I went to Vegas, I really gained a new appreciation for rock and roll music, which I had not followed in the past. It's funny because in Las Vegas, Elvis was in the big room, and you had a superstar in the smaller room, the lounge, Eddie Cochran and the CC Riders.
Yes.
You heard of him?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
And Red Fox was in the lounge. There was a young group called Beverly and Cedro and the Beverly's Armadas. So there were, at that time, of course, Frank Sinatra was big at the Desert Inn, and several of the big names, Big Damone, and can't think of their names right now.
I suppose there was people
yes.
I was thinking of people like Dean Martin, and you mentioned Frank Sinatra, and obviously there was other people. I think Shirley Bassey and Tom Jones was also sort of doing their little bits and pieces there as well, weren't they? As well as, yes, the birth, right. I suppose. So from your gospel background, did Vegas and Elvis, did that feel like a natural fit? Did you think, because in retrospect, obviously things always can be quite different, but at the time, did you think, not quite sure if I really want to get involved in, the world of Las Vegas and that sort of mafia association and a certain amount of, I suppose, at that time there was a certain sleaziness to it. So I just wondered if it was kind of, did you have any doubts of, wanting to perform in Vegas with Elvis at this point?
When I got there, it just seemed like a natural marriage for us because Elvis grew up singing gospel music as well. He raised up in a little church in Tupelo, Mississippi called First Assembly, singing the same songs that I sang in Memphis. And he loved my family, the Blackwood Brothers Quartet. In fact, when he and his parents moved to Memphis, to a little the project area called Lauderdale Courts, he started coming to our church and listening to my family sing. So he was familiar with our music as we were with his music. And I think that our music kind of influenced him in the direction of the style of music he wanted to do, just as his music influenced our style of music.
Yes.
So I think for us, it was a natural progression of a marriage of two different styles who merged into one major force. Because when you heard Elvis sing, he sang with such power and such feeling and emotion, and he got that from the gospel music he heard from my family many years before that time.
Yeah, and when you, because obviously you'd been around from childbirth, from basically being born to that moment, surrounded by singers. I mean, so you'd obviously got quite a feeling for the voice. I mean, how did you kind of feel, or what was your kind of reaction when you heard Elvis singing, especially in the same space? Was there something quite different or special about Elvis, or did you I just was kind of curious how that sort of resonated with you?
Well, I will say that we've worked with several artists. We worked with Pat Boone, we worked with Carol Channing, we've worked with several artists. But when Elvis walked on the stage, there was a charisma there that no other artist we ever worked with had. And I was taken by the power of his charisma on the stage. And a lot of that was because of the influences of the Blackwood Brothers and the gospel quartet influences, plus the prayers of his mother. His mother was a devout Christian, and she prayed for Elvis every day. And Elvis achieved a level of success that no other artist has ever achieved. And I think a lot of that is due to the prayers of his mother and the dedication of Elvis to be the very best singer, entertainer that's ever lived. Now, he didn't go around, he didn't get into the business to be a star.
Mm-hmm.
You know that the first record he ever made was a little record at Sun Studios he made for his mother. And he took that song to his mother and let her hear it. And it so happened that Sam Phillips, who was the head of Sun Records, was in the recording room and heard him sing. And Sam had been looking for a white guy who sounded black, and he couldn't find one anywhere. You know, all of your black singers sounded black, but all of your white singers sounded white. So here was this young white guy who sounded black, and he was so good looking. And Sam said, "Son, I would love to sign you to a label." So he signed him to Sun Records and started doing a few of those cover tunes like Hound Dog and all those tunes that he really didn't want to sing. But when he took his white influences onto a song that was recorded by black artists, it just resonated with the white audience and the black audience in Memphis. And all of a sudden, he was a major star in Memphis. And then he started taking his music all over the South. And he actually wound up singing in a lot of these country music venues. And he looked kind of funny standing up there in his suit right after Hank Snow had sung. But the people, the young girls especially, just took to him immediately. And that's when Colonel Parker found him and convinced him to sign with him. And so the Colonel worked a deal with Sam Phillips so that he bought us Elvis's contract. And from then on, it was just history.
Yes, and just to get an idea of the sort of period of Elvis in Vegas, was this kind of, because they built the International, hadn't they, and they signed Elvis as their kind of star attraction. When did he first start performing in Vegas?
Well, he had I think I had heard that back in the mid-50s or early 60s, he opened at a theater downtown Las Vegas, and he was beginning to make a name for himself. And when he opened in Las Vegas downtown, the older audience didn't like him at all. And in fact, they pawned him. They gave him bad reviews. So he left Vegas with his tail between his legs, thinking he'd never go back. Well, in the meantime, he started having major hits on the radio.
Yes.
And so in 1969, the International, which had just opened, wanted to bring Elvis out there because it was the biggest arena in the entire town. And Elvis was reluctant to do it because he had been such a failure before. But he did reluctantly agree to do it, and that's why he wanted the best groups he could get. And he got the Sweet Inspirations and the Imperials and the TCB Band. And he came out there and tried his best to put on the best show he could.
Yes.
And I have to tell you, opening night, when he walked backstage with us to the back of the stage, he was as nervous as a cat. He was so afraid that they weren't going to like him then. And he would stand back there and say, "Oh, man, I don't know if they're going to like me. They didn't like me before." And we had to reassure him that these people were going to be hugely attracted to him and his music. And it's funny, you think of Elvis as this confident, almost cocky guy, but he was not. He was very insecure at times and insecure about his music. He always wanted the people to love him, but he didn't know if they would until he stepped out on stage.
Yes, that's kind of interesting because I've done a lot. Sorry, after you.
Yeah, and so what I'm saying was, back then they had these flash cameras, with the big flash bulbs.
Yes.
And he was backstage, and we were talking to him, trying to reassure him. And he was, of course, like he always did. His fingers were twitching, and he was nervous and upset and unsure. And when he walked out on stage, every light bulb, every flash bulb in the house went off at the same time. And you should have heard the cheers that he got when he walked on stage.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously,
it was amazing.
Because with a lot of artists, I mean, and it's interesting about when you said about nervousness, because I think when a lot of people start, and people I've spoke to, they're often in that late teens, early 20s. So there's that combination of kind of youthful naivety kind of and arrogance, which you kind of need. But as you get older, doubt starts to appear and you start to question things, and it's very difficult to take that kind of thought process out. So I think, and Elvis had obviously had that kind of early success, and then a lot of the films, and then sort of, I suppose with people, with the next wave of the youth culture coming through, every youth culture wants their kind of heroes for whatever purpose. But like the Beatles and the Stones, and Elvis obviously started to look a bit like, not past it, but certainly probably from a different period. And and there was a few kind of times I think he kind of doubted himself a lot of the relevance and where he stood in popular music, because obviously he wasn't going to get involved with the kind of hippie culture, because that wasn't his style. So I guess it was quite a big thing. Like you said, there was probably a lot of doubt and sort of wonder if he's still relevant and whether anybody still likes him. And I guess with every performer, there's a strange kind of, there's both an ego and an insecurity that goes together, that needing to be loved, but at the same time wondering if it's going to be reciprocated.
Exactly.
And with the band,
now I would say that a lot of the major artists like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, those guys were great singers and great entertainers, but I don't think I don't know what their personality was, because I never met them, but I do know that Elvis was a very humble guy. I know that during the course of his life, he got a little off track and he began to get influenced by other people, but the heart of Elvis was always a good person, a very loving person, and one who always wanted to please his audience. And so,
yes,
as far as that goes, I've always been a huge Elvis Presley fan, and I will forever thank him for what he did for us. But actually, God put us together. God impressed upon Elvis to call the Imperials, and God put us together. So I'm so pleased about that.
Absolutely. And with the band, I mean, this was kind of a very different band than the one he'd started with. What was the dynamic and the rehearsals? What was that atmosphere and kind of energy like when you started to sort of get together and go through the set and different numbers?
Well, there was an excitement in the air because he had hired the best black vocalist he could find, the Sweet Inspirations. He hired the best guitar player he could find, James Burton, the best bass player he could find, Jerry Schiff. Ronnie Tutt was an animal on the drums. I've never heard a drummer like Ronnie Tutt. And then he had the first pianist was Larry Mahobarak, but Larry was doing session work. So after a month with Elvis, he decided he didn't want to do it anymore. So James called Glenn D. Harden to fill in, and Glenn was there for the remainder of the time that he was with Elvis. So I would say that we had the best band that money could buy, and he had the best singers money could buy.
Yes,
and it was all backed up by a 40-piece orchestra. So you can imagine what a huge sound it was. I mean, and then he had Millie Kirkham singing the high notes. So if you ever saw Elvis, That's the Way It Is, that's the way it was.
Yeah.
It was powerful.
I would imagine it was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, having that amount of, musicians and singers and both as a sort of sonic experience musically, and also sort of visually, because it was quite a big run. Because did you sing with him between, was it 66 to kind of 71? So that was a good 4 years together.
Yes, we did. We did the several of the songs on the How Great Thou Art record, and I can't recall all the rock and roll tunes we did from then until 69. But after that point, we did every song that he put on tape. And so, I mean, our resume is quite long of our association with Elvis.
Yes, absolutely.
And the songs that we backed him up on.
And how many dates were you roughly playing a year, or sort of in total, with that kind of chapter of your life? I just wondered. Yes, I've kind of got a vague idea, but you would know more than I do.
When we opened in Vegas in 1969, we did 2 shows a night. We did an 8 o'clock show. We had a break at 10. We came back at midnight and did a midnight show. We did that every night for a month. And occasionally on a Sunday afternoon, we would do a matinee. So if you're thinking 2 times 28, that's 56 shows plus 4 matinees. That's 60 shows we did the first month. And we did that twice a year with no night off. Every night we worked. And then there was 1 year in 1970 where we did another series of shows with Jimmy Dean. It was funny because we closed with Elvis on one night, and the next night we opened at another theater across town with Jimmy Dean when we were there for a month as well. So in the month of 1970, I was in Vegas for 4 months.
Wow.
4 months.
You must have, yes.
With no nights off.
Yeah. And how did you manage your vocals and sort of just, yes, on the voice? Did you have to take particular care, or were you doing more exercises, or how did you work that? Because most people have quite a lot of problems after a while, don't they?
I never sing harder than my voice will allow, but I have found that with me, the more I sing, the better I sing.
Right.
And so I got stronger the more I sang than had I just stayed off for 2 or 3 weeks. So for me, it was better for me to be singing every night and not straining my voice, because it's easy to get Vegas throat because it's so dry out there.
Yeah.
But what you do is you drink a lot of water and you just don't over sing a song. And by the time I left there, my voice was amazingly strong.
Mm.
And I find that even today when I'm in my car, I'm singing in the car. I'm not giving up my voice out of getting older. I feel like my voice is as strong as ever. I may have, in fact, it may be a little deeper and fuller than it used to be.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I guess these things do sort of alter with age. And how did your relationship with the great Colonel? Did you have to do much kind of, negotiation or dealing with the Colonel, or was that something that didn't happen that much?
We didn't talk to the Colonel. We talked to his assistant, Tom Diskin. And Diskin was the gentleman in the group, and he did all the negotiations with the group and with the Sweet Inspirations and the TCB band. And the Colonel just told Tom Diskin what to tell us. So as far as our relationship with the Colonel, we really didn't have one, but that's okay. We understood that the Colonel wasn't a people person. He was a business guy, and he did his very best to make Elvis the biggest star he could.
Yes, absolutely. And did you find that every show, because you were doing two a night sometimes for a month, did you find that the audience was always really on it, and the atmosphere was electric?
I never saw a crowd when we were with him that wasn't electric. Some of those people had saved their money for years to see Elvis Presley, and they were going to enjoy it with everything they could, and they did. I mean, those crowds were just electric, every one of them, and everything Elvis did, they loved, and he would have probably sung another hour if this, but the casino wanted the people out there gambling.
Yes, absolutely.
But Elvis always gave it his very best when he was on stage.
Yeah, and how were you finding, Las Vegas? Because obviously it's very different now. But then there was that sort of the mafia moment. There was also the Howard Hughes time, and obviously Vegas was changing quite a lot from the 60s into the 70s. Did you sort of enjoy sort of staying and living in Vegas during those months?
I enjoyed it. I having been raised in church, first thing I did was find a church in Vegas. And believe it or not, there are churches in Las Vegas.
Yes.
Big churches. But my schedule was I would finish the show at 2 a.m. I would get back to my room unless Elvis called us up to the penthouse where we would stay there till 5. But if we weren't called to the penthouse, I would go back to my apartment. We each had little apartments with a kitchen, a living room, and a bedroom, and a bath, of course. And I would sleep till maybe 11ish or 11:30. Get up, make something to eat, and get out. There was a tennis court in the middle of the motel. And we guys would play tennis during the afternoon.
God, that sounds beautiful.
And yeah, so then after tennis, which was like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then I would take a shower, get ready to get something to eat, and go back to the casino for the 8 o'clock show. We did that almost every night for a month. And I tell you what, I never felt better in my life. And at that time, I weighed 128 pounds, David.
Yes, I bet
128 pounds.
Excellent. I bet you were in very good shape. I'm sure your core work, your core stability, yes, would have been very good with your tennis playing, going and twisting and sprinting. Yes, it does make quite a difference even. And also it's probably quite hot, so you would have sweated an awful lot off. Can you remember what motel you were staying in?
It was a motel called the Valley High, and I think they tore it down. It was because the land was more valuable than the motel.
Yes, I'm sure.
But it was called the Balihai, Valley High.
Yes,
it was right behind the Desert Inn. And what's so weird is we stood there looking out at Elvis's penthouse all over the desert. Nothing you could see. Hardly any houses, nothing but desert. Had we had any kind of foresight at that time, we should have just bought some of that desert land. Because
yes,
every bit of it is now turned into a subdivision.
It's with a very massive hotel. Did as you were sort of seeing that sort of, I suppose people wanting to see Elvis backstage, did you get to sort of also interact with a lot of, I don't know, other singers and musicians or film people who wanted to see Elvis at that stage, or was that something that didn't sort of come into your sort of orbit of at the hotel?
Well, opening night we were standing there, and there on the front row was Sammy Davis Jr., the entertainer, and Sammy loved Elvis. And he was right down front, center stage. right in the middle of the show, Elvis walked over to Sammy, took off one of his rings, and he handed it to Sammy. Sammy was just so excited about the interaction he had with Elvis.
Yes, I would imagine.
But also during that show was Cary Grant, Juliet Prowse. Almost every Hollywood entertainer that could be there was there for opening night. But as far as my interaction, the only time I really interacted with any of them was I just met them, but I didn't really talk to them. But one night at the penthouse upstairs, we were standing around the piano with Mama Cass of the Mamas and the Papas.
Yes.
And we were standing around the piano singing Amazing Grace. We sang all 4 verses. And as we were singing, I looked over at her and she was crying. And when we finished the song, it was just this hush over the whole room. And nobody knew what to say because they looked at her and she was crying. She said, "Elvis, I haven't sung that song since I was a little girl." It touched her that much.
Yes, powerful stuff, actually, isn't it? Very powerful. Did you ever,
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned that Elvis was kind of quite apprehensive and nervous on that opening night. Did that change at all, or was there always a sort of sense of nervous energy and anticipation before each show?
I think gradually it got better because he had decided that he was not going to be rejected like he was before. So I think he changed his attitude somewhat and realized that he really was the star that the people wanted him to be. But he never really lorded it over us. He was always respectful and appreciative of what we contributed to his show. So for that, I'm very grateful.
Absolutely.
Elvis is the only entertainer I have ever worked with who could sing a ballad and sing it so well and turn right around and sing Hound Dog and sing it just as well. I don't know of any other entertainer in my life that could do that for an hour show twice a night. Elvis Presley was the only one that I knew that could do it.
Yes, absolutely. And when it came to your, the end of your sort of working with Elvis, was that sort of June 1971? Was that the sort of summer of 71 that you parted ways?
Yes,
Was that sort of in the contract, or had you, one of the different parties had decided that you were going to change direction?
Well, the story is, at that time, the Imperials were sought after by every promoter and every sponsor in the nation. And since Elvis only worked 2 months out of the year, that gave us 10 months where we weren't doing anything unless we were working with Jimmy Dean. So the owners of the group, Jim Murray, Armand Morales, and Joe Mosqueo, got together and they decided, we would love to stay with Elvis if he would just let us do our other things when we weren't with him. But I don't think the Colonel liked that idea.
Yes.
He wanted the group that was available anytime he called them. And so the guys made the difficult decision that they needed to leave Elvis and go to Jimmy Dean and then fulfill the contracts that they had already signed to do gospel concerts all across the nation.
Mm.
So I think looking back on it, it was a bad decision. We should have stayed with Elvis, but it wasn't my decision.
Yes.
It was a decision of two out of the 3 guys said, we need to work the whole year and not just 2 months of the year. So the decision was made. It was a very difficult one too, because none of us wanted to leave Elvis. He was always so kind to us and so appreciative of us. And the strange thing was that 6 months later he did Aloha. Aloha from, let's see, what was it called? Elvis from Aloha, Hawaii.
Right.
And had we stayed 6 more months, we would have been on that.
Oh, yes. Can you remember the last concert you did with Elvis in Vegas?
Actually, I don't. I really don't remember the last one. It was they all run together. We did so many.
Yes, I could imagine.
2 shows a night for 2 months out of the year, and we did that for 2 years. Plus, we did some tours. We did the West Coast tour, and we did the Astrodome in Houston, and we did Denver, and we did so many concerts with Elvis. That was one of my regrets is leaving Elvis, even though I wanted to stay because he was so kind to us, and I loved singing with him.
Yeah.
I really do think that we made him a better singer because he loved the sound of the Imperials, and I think he wanted us to stay. But we made the decision to leave, and we stuck with it.
I know it's always yes. These are difficult, tricky moments, aren't they? One can replay them in your mind, but you have to make the call. Was that the last time you saw Elvis during that?
No, it wasn't, because after we opened with Jimmy Dean not long after that at the Desert Inn, and it was not several weeks later that with Jimmy, we opened the show. We did 3 songs, and then we would back Jimmy Dean up in the show. And there were several nights that Elvis would come over after if he wasn't working, he would come over to see the show. And one night in particular, Jimmy was doing his routine, which basically was telling jokes in between songs. And right in the middle of one of the jokes, somebody yelled out in the middle of the showroom, "Let the Imperials sing!" And we knew who it was. It was Elvis.
It was Elvis, wasn't
it? And so Jimmy kind of ignored him for a minute. There was another quiet moment in the show, and he said, "Let the Imperials sing." So he said, "Okay, Elvis, here they are, the Imperials." So we got up and we sang a song for Elvis.
Oh, that's a lovely touch. So then, as kind of one door closes, another one opens. What then happens with yourself and the Imperials for the sort of the next decade? Is this a case of more kind of live shows and recordings?
Yes, exactly. We left in 1971. We had some huge hits, 1972, 1973, 1974, and 1975. 1974's recording was called "Follow the Man with the Music," nominated for a Grammy, but it should have won a Grammy. And then we came back with "No Shortage," which won the Grammy in 1975. So the Imperials were enjoying a great deal of success all over the nation as we sang to mostly colleges, Jesus festivals, Christian colleges, even secular colleges. We enjoyed a great long run of concerts with all over the nation, but. It came 76 was when I decided to leave the group. And but during the time I was there, we had some huge years, huge. And so I'm grateful for my time with the group. And in 1997, after all these years passed by and Elvis had passed away, they came back and wanted to do an Elvis the concert. And actually, they didn't really know what it was going to sound like. They brought Elvis back on the giant screen. They brought the Imperials and the Stamps and the Jordanaires all on stage with the Sweet Inspirations at the Coliseum there in Memphis. And they actually had Lisa Marie sing "Don't Cry Daddy" with Elvis on stage, on the screen. And little did they know that the crowd were just going to go crazy over it. They didn't care that Elvis was dead. They saw him on a giant screen, and they almost felt like he was there. So right before the show started, they brought this long black limousine down the side of the auditorium, and they slowly drove that car right down the side of the building where the people could see it. And the music started with a 2001 Odyssey, and the limousine disappeared behind the black curtain, and then Ronnie Tutch started the drums on 2001, and all of a sudden the crowd came alive because there he was on the giant screen with the Imperials, the Stamps, and the Jordanaires, and the Sweet Inspirations, and the TCB band. It was one of those nights that I'll never forget. I wish they had recorded the whole thing. I don't think they did.
Did you had you recorded, or have they released any of the Vegas live recordings with the Imperials and the Vegas band?
Well, they have the one that's called Elvis, That's the Way It Is. Do you have that one?
I'll check. I can't remember now. That's the way it is.
What it is was, the first month we were there, they filmed the entire month, and they took the best footage of every concert, and they compiled it into one long DVD that was made available for Elvis fans. And that's really the essence of what the show was like when we opened in Vegas. And you can find that, I guess, on Elvis.com. I don't have any with me, but I think you can buy one at Elvis.com, which will show you really what it was like when we opened in Vegas.
I've got it. Yes. So this is the one that's just to see if I've got in the right ballpark. This is the one that has "I Just Can't Help Believing" 20 Days and 20 Nights, and also a version of the Simon and Garfunkel song "Bridge Over Troubled Waters" as well. Water, which is which, yes, I do remember this one. It's amazing.
Right.
Yes. Well, and Polk Salad Annie, which is quite an extraordinary kind of beefy song, isn't it? I love the tempo change in that and the lyrics.
Elvis is the only artist that I know of who could cover "Bridge Over Troubled Waters," sung by Simon and Garfunkel, and actually make it a better song.
Yes, this is true.
And he cut Tony Joe White's song, Polk Salad Annie. He made it a better song than Tony Joe White made.
Yeah, that's a great song, but it must be quite tricky to sing, actually, pull that one off, actually. Oh, well, no, I'll be listening to this and thinking of you at the same time, obviously. But during those periods when you weren't in the band, were you still singing in any other groups, or was it mostly back in the church and in your community?
Well, I was with the Imperials until 1976.
Yes.
And after that, I traveled around with my sister for a year, singing in churches. One of the concerts we did, we were invited to go to Calcutta, India, to sing for a missionary in Calcutta, India, Dr. Mark Buntain. And we were there for 2 weeks for a Christmas celebration. during our time in in Calcutta, we happened to walk by the home of Mother Teresa. We knocked on the door, and a sweet little lady came to the door, and we said, "Is it possible that Mother Teresa is there?" She said, "Yes, she's here." So she came out. She's very polite. She bowed, shook her hand. We had a picture made with Mother Teresa. And so had some exciting times there with my sister for a year.
Yes.
And after that period of time, I formed another group called Andrews Blackwood and Company. We had a 9-year run, and we had a number of huge, successful songs that were on the radio. So I've had 9 years with the Imperials, a year with my sister, and then 9 years with Andrews Blackwood and Company, and then 2 years with a group called Friends 4 back in the late 90s, 2 of the best recordings I've ever done. And then we started the Elvis the Concert series. That lasted about 5 years, and that took us all the way to Australia and Japan and all of Europe and London and Paris and all the major European cities. So I've had a very exciting life, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
It sounds absolutely extraordinary. I mean, if there was anything that you could have just whispered to your 16-year-old self starting out, is there any little word of wisdom or some sort of... Yes, it doesn't have to say, it could be something like, "Oh, yes, keep doing that because that's a good idea." Or, "Oh, yes, do sort of think about this," or, "Oh, by the way, do check that out." I mean, is there any, having the experience of being around for quite a few decades and meeting so many people and being involved with so many people, I just wondered if there would have been a few words of wisdom that you might have just kind of imparted.
Well, I feel like God has directed my life the entire time, because I basically was raised very shy, and I really didn't want to sing in front of people. And I didn't want to work in Vegas. I didn't want to sing with the Imperials. I was a reluctant singer and a reluctant entertainer. And I guess God knew he could trust me, because he chose me to be one of the singers that sang behind Elvis. So I don't know how to describe what I was feeling, except to say that I'm very grateful to God for the doors that he opened for me. And I've tried my best to be faithful to him and let him know how much I appreciate what he's done for me. I'm not being a prude, but I never drank. I never smoked. I had no desire to do any of that stuff. I don't know why you have to drink to have a good time. I have a better time when I'm sober. So yes. I just have enjoyed every door that's been opened, and I'm grateful for every opportunity that's been given to me.
Yes. And did you, as I say, yes, I mean, has that sort of faith, has that sort of held you together during the sort of some of the, sometimes the trickier periods of life? I just wondered if there was times where you really had to draw on sort of your relationship with God to sort of keep it going when things are looking a bit difficult or a bit tricky.
Well, I've had some rough times. I got COVID last year and thought I was going to die, and couldn't sleep. I could barely put one foot in front of the other. And I really thought I was going to die. I've had very difficult times in my life. But I have never doubted the faithfulness of God to see me through it. And now I feel like, people say to me, how do you do it? Well, I do it because God put me here, and I feel like I have a responsibility to give him my very best every time. That's why I don't just sit down and watch TV and get fat. I'm out. I'm singing. I mowed the yard yesterday. I'm active. I'm always doing things, and I'm very appreciative to God for every opportunity He's given me.
Yes, absolutely. And did you, I mean, just kind of one of those thoughts, I just wonder if it ever came into your mind. Did you ever feel you'd wished you could have been with Elvis a bit longer, during that 70s period? I just wondered if you thought you could have possibly given him a bit more direction or helped him a bit more as things started to get a bit difficult for him towards, 76, 77.
Well, I actually do. I feel like we should have stayed longer. I think we would have been a better influence on him. Music would have been better. A lot of things would have been better if we'd have just stayed. But it wasn't my decision.
No.
At that time I was just a hired hand, an employee, and I had to go where the guy said go. But I do think that had we stayed with Elvis, things would have been better for him. He would have had better influences in his life, and he might have made better decisions.
Yes, it's hard not to think that, isn't it, really, at times?
Mm-hmm.
Tricky one. So with your, just slightly, you've done quite a few solo albums and you've done anthologies as well. Is there any plans coming up or in the next couple of years of doing any more kind of recordings?
Yeah, we just finished a recording that we've already released it. It's called The Way, and it's available at our website at www.terryblackwood.com. It's but we're still recording and doing as many shows as we can, and grateful for every opportunity.
Yes,
I think COVID has made it more difficult. But we're still determined to share our music with the world.
Absolutely. Indeed. And that was me in conversation with Terry Blackwood, talking about his life in music, working with Elvis Presley and also the Imperials. A massive thank you for giving me the time for that interview. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 Show, you'll find it. Keep it positive, keep it nice, keep it groovy. And also all these interviews have been archived. You can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.